Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Nick Byrne.
And I'm Alastair Ball.
And in this 11th episode, we will be looking back at the whole of Game of Thrones Season 6, as well as the recent Independence Day sequel, Independence Day Resurgence, the new podcast from the Welcome to Night Vale team, Within the Wires, and we'll be looking at my recommendation from last week, which was Dead Like Me, the first few episodes of that. So, for the second episode running, no superheroes, which upsets me quite a lot, I'm going to be honest. But first, obviously we've been quite busy over here in the UK with the world falling apart thanks to the Brexit vote, but Alastair, have you found time around that to watch any telly?
Well, this week I've been listening to a podcast because the news has been so awful that I've decided I've been listening to a podcast about history in order to get away from how terrible the news has been.
But the going gets tough, Alastair retreats into the past.
It's either retreats into a science fiction novel or a history documentary. That's kind of my go-to things. Yeah, some form of escapism through time, either the future or the past.
I can't really judge you. When the going gets tough, I run crying back to Batman.
Then the last week, I've been listening to Neil McGregor's Radio 4 show, Shakespeare's Restless World. It's available on podcasts, like most Radio 4 shows are, and it's the former director of the British Museum talking about Shakespeare and his plays and their kind of what influenced them, how they've influenced modern society, how they reflected the world they were set in. It's done in 15-minute installments, so I think it's about 40 or 30 very short 15-minute installments. So they're really kind of nice, bite-sized bits of information about, sort of Shakespeare and Elizabethan times. Perfect for a commute. A nice kind of very short podcast thing, and it's really informative and really interesting. And yeah, Neil McGregor's a great broadcaster, exceptional knowledge. Like I say, he was the director of the British Museum until very recently, and he really presents the show with flair, with passion, with in-depth knowledge, and it's very entertaining. So this is so in this Shakespeare anniversary year, and if you want something to listen to that will teach you something about Shakespeare, I can highly recommend Shakespeare's Restless World.
The only thing I've done for Shakespeare's anniversary year was watch the Philomena Kunk documentary.
I saw that too. I thought it was really good.
Yeah, that was great. But I did kind of neglect to watch anything more educational. I just watched that documentary, which was kind of deliberately not educational.
Well, it had a few bits, like obviously saying that Shakespeare's greatest creation was Game of Thrones. But the rest of the show actually did manage to get quite a lot of interesting facts about Shakespeare into a comedy show.
For American listeners, Philomena Kunk will be a bit of a distant reference, but yeah, she's a supporting character on some comedy shows by Charlie Brooker, who I guess you might know best for writing Black Mirror, who has been given her own spin-off show about Shakespeare. Philomena Kunk is a sort of, I guess, a satirical, stupid person who delivers documentaries in a deliberately stupid way.
It's kind of a commentary on how complex and difficult subjects kind of get boiled down to their essence for TV to make them kind of palatable. And it is in some ways a meta commentary on how kind of the details get lost and the important debates disappear when we try to streamline things for entertainment. But it's just funny in its own right. I'm sure it's all migrated its way to YouTube by now, so if any Americans want to see what British people have been distracting themselves with while the entire country disintegrates around them.
I've had loads of Charlie Brooker on YouTube. I think he's pretty widespread. So although a lot of the TV shows he mocks might well be a bit out of the American frame of reference, he's still good value.
But anyway, that's what I've been up to this week. Nick, what have you been watching, listening to, reading?
Well, over the last probably month or two, I've read the first 5 collections of a comic called Revival. This is from Image Comics, and it's by Tim Seeley and drawn by Mike Norton. And it's a sort of supernatural, semi-zombie noir thing, I think. There's a small town in America, like proper small, everyone knows each other type town, and people start returning from the dead. Not in a brain-eaty way, but just they're back from the dead. And of course, as you'd expect, there's more to it than meets the eye, and there's a sort of a police unit established to deal with them, and one of the cops, his sister, is one of the revivers, and she has to investigate what's going on with it, and you quickly get a look at the sort of supernatural underpinnings, and it's very good. It's premise-wise, it's kind of similar to...
Sounds like The Returned.
French
TV
The Returned,
show.
The French TV show and American remade TV show, which I think we also referenced last time as resembling something we were talking about, Outcast maybe. But yeah, Revival, it's a bit less sort of slow and atmospheric. It's a bit more sort of action noir, but with a weird sort of rural setting. It doesn't actually say this has zombies in it on the cover. It says a rural noir on the cover, and that's, I think, a big part of what it's doing. Noir tends to be quite city-based, but I think the Revival makes it work, and the zombie thing, despite the obvious played-outness of zombies, is done in an interesting enough way. A way that resembles The Returns, but isn't exactly the same as it. But yeah, no, it's a good comic. I'm about 5 books in, and I think they've confirmed it's going to finish with book 8. So, annoyingly now I've got to actually stop and wait for them to release more books, I think, which is always the annoying part with these comics.
I'm glad when they have a serial project and they say they're going to end it at a certain point and actually move towards an ending rather than, kind of just spin things on as long as possible to make as much money as possible.
Well, with these sort of mature reader comics, I think to sort of 5-6 years... In fact, 5-ish years seems to be the sweet spot, I think. A lot of ongoing adult comics often end up ending around the 50-60 issue mark. Like, that's when Preacher ended, that's when Transmetropolitan ended. Sandman went a bit longer, to 75.
First up this episode, we will be discussing the ending of Game of Thrones Series 6. We talked about how this series began in Episode 6. As usual, this series contained many deaths, lots of blood, lots of intrigue, and also, crucially, some plot movement. So Nick, what were some of your highlights from the last series?
I think, as with a lot of people, I think a lot of the highlights were the bits in the last couple of episodes when everything sort of exploded. As I guess we should say, spoilers. Although, since this is coming out about a week and a half after the finale, I'm assuming if you care massively about spoilers, you've probably seen it.
Yeah.
So, anyway. I was quite a big fan of a lot of the apparent actual payoffs. Like, Series 4 and 5 of Game of Thrones, although I still broadly enjoyed them, did slightly have the feeling of, like, this is very much in the middle. We're sort of wading through the middle of it and nothing's actually going to get resolved. Everything keeps us getting pushed further down the line. So, seeing some actual genuine massive movements, like Starks actually meeting each other for the first time possibly since they all went their own way in Series 1, I think. I think Jon and Sansa interacting this series, So you think, if you put something off for long enough, you do build an inevitable sense of actual event and it actually mattering when you finally do it. So, Jon and Sansa actually being in the same place and interacting seems like a big deal. I mean, the fact that their interactions are actually good and interesting helps as well. Yeah, the feeling of everything converging a bit, Hodor's resolution in the middle of a series...
That was heartbreaking, the Hodor bit.
Yeah, up until the last couple of episodes, that was one of the big highlights of the series for me. That was the big... memorable moment.
Yeah, it's very sad, and very, very well done. But yeah, I completely agree with what you were saying, that it seems to be pitching up a gear a bit. I certainly did feel that Series 5 very much was it was slowing down a bit. The plots weren't progressing. They were progressing very slowly. There were lots of sort of dramatic arcs that were thrown out in Series 5 that I thought could have been resolved in that series, but I'm glad that they were fully resolved in Series 6. So, so Ramsay Bolton taking over Winterfell and lording it over people there. The plot with the High Sparrow in King's Landing.
Well, yeah, I mean, the High Sparrow and Ramsay Bolton did operate sort of similar roles at different ends of the story. Sort of they're the thing for the characters to fight against in the interim, so that they're distracted from actually going after each other. Like, the Starks are fighting Ramsay, the Lannisters are fighting the High Sparrow, and even Daenerys is off dealing with Meereen and the Dothraki. And the big unifying thing at the end of Series 6 was they all seemed to put their distractions aside and at least start moving towards all converging on each other.
Yeah, we're entering the final act of the Game of Thrones TV show. They say there's going to be 2 more series of between 6 to 7 episodes each rather than 10. And I think that is a really good number. That should be pretty much the right one to wrap all the plot lines up.
I think the most broad way of looking at that is, I guess it'll be like one series of everyone fighting each other and then one series of them finally teaming up to fight the White Walkers. But obviously, and indeed hopefully, it won't be that simple. But I'm assuming that'll be the sort of broad shape of it.
Well, there'll definitely be various alliances along the way, such as Jon Snow and Sansa are installed at Winterfell. They obviously want to defend their newly resurgent Northern Kingdom, but they're aware obviously that the Lannisters won't be particularly pleased with them declaring independence, and also they've got the White Walkers and the Night King descending from the north with their army of the dead. So, and then Daenerys is converging on everyone with her dragons, her Dothraki, her Unsullied. She seems to have made an alliance with Dorne, so I assume she'll land in Dorne, and that's where her invasion of the Southern Kingdoms will begin.
I don't know, I also feel like that would be a bit of an annoying extra diversion. I sort of hope she's just going to sail straight into Westeros at this point. There's only 13, 14 episodes left, might as well get down to it.
I can imagine that she's going to land somewhere and then assemble her land army, because her army is strongest on land, as she has Dothraki and Unsullied who are foot soldiers. So I can imagine, she'll find a piece of friendly country, namely Dorne, to land on, assemble her army, and then advance on them.
Yeah, as you say, this did feel like the end of Act 2. This definitely felt like, a major cut-off point for a load of stuff finishing and next series, a load of new stuff starting. And I quite like the sense of sort of genuine epic of it. Like, you had this sort of the War of Five Kings, which I guess ran roughly from sort of season 1 to season 3. And then you had, like, about 3 seasons of peace. And then now there's going to be another war.
Yeah, and also winter has finally arrived, which means that the White Walkers will descend on the Seven Kingdoms soon.
Yeah, that's quite like the sense of genuine sort of sweeping epic. This is like the movements of history. Like, we've been watching this for years and, through a series of, like, tangible eras.
There's also some other things I really like that really move the plot forwards, like Arya finally returning to Westeros. She's properly badass now and has started to exact her revenge. So that was a good development. I'm glad her plot seems to be propelling itself towards the others.
Yes, but I thought Arya's scene in the last episode was obviously great. Arya's storyline in this season as a whole does kind of win the coveted story that didn't really work award for me this year, to be honest. Or at least the story that was the least good compared to the others.
Well, it was her, I guess, basically being trained up, mainly. Well, yeah. It was just her learning to be a badass.
But that's what it was last year. I don't know, I mean, last year's crap storyline award was won fairly and squarely by Jaime and Bronn go on holiday to Dawn, which was...
Yeah, that was pointless.
Pretty bad. I don't think Arya's storyline this year was quite that bad, but it was a lot of... Until about episode 8 or something, or maybe episode 7. It did seem to be making the same point again and again about Arya being told you need to be no one, her claiming to be no one but clearly not meaning it. So by the time she finally beats the evil woman...
She doesn't have a name because she is no one.
And yeah, that's a good point. By the time she beats evil no one, she says to Jaqen H'ghar, a girl is Arya Stark. It's like, well, that's been obvious since episode 2. This is not a storyline that has gone anywhere. Although it did bring us the actors redoing the events of the first few seasons in pantomime form, which was really, really funny.
Yeah, with Kevin Eldon and Richard E. Grant in cameos. Yeah. It was worth it for that. And also there was some really great stuff in there to do with how Arya was processing emotionally the events that happened. And also it shows kind of how the propaganda engine works in that society, how the Lannisters have rewritten all their treachery to be them as the heroes. But I think what you're saying about Arya's plotline being a bit slow, not progressing particularly well this series, I mean, I agree with that. And it kind of ties into what I was saying, that a lot of stuff I felt that was thrown out in Series 5 could have been resolved in Series 5. Like that Arya and the Faceless people could have been a one series plot, but it was 2 series plot. And like the High Sparrow, again, could have been a 1 series plot.
So a lot of, those 2 storylines especially did just sort of sit there for the bulk of the season and then sort of judder forwards at the end.
Yeah.
I mean, Ramsay Bolton as well, to be honest. I mean, much as I enjoy watching him kill off B-list characters in really sadistic ways, because I genuinely do enjoy it, it was, he didn't add a lot to his storyline beyond killing his dad and then getting killed himself.
Yeah, and his plotline could have been resolved in the last series. One of the things that's good about this series, and the last series as well, and I think the series before that, is there has been quite a high body count, which means they've been reducing down the number of plot lines to focus it in. So, like I say, they killed off all the Boltons, they killed off the Blackfish, they killed off the other guy who was taking over River Run, they killed off the High Sparrow, they killed off pretty much all the Tyrells, apart from the Queen of Thorns. So, as they kill off their characters, which is the thing the show is famous for, they also at the same time concentrate the plot line down to its core elements, which is very good if they're progressing towards a conclusion.
Yeah.
And they're bringing in some of the other wider plots they've thrown out, such as Dawn declaring war on the Lannisters. They're linking that into the Daenerys plotline.
Yeah, Dawn sort of... there was the big coup in Dawn in episode 1, and then they disappeared till episode 10. I don't know whether that was... I don't know, the writers tacitly admitting that their version of Dawn wasn't working that well and they could safely ignore it for most of the series.
Well, I think it's just to join it in with the main plot. I mean, at this point, starting a whole new separate Dawnish plot wouldn't work at all. It had to be joined to one of the main plot threads that we're moving towards for the finale. And I think they did that well by linking it in with Daenerys' invasion. And like I say, I can imagine in the next series, her plotline involving her invasion of the Seven Kingdoms will start in Dawn.
I quite enjoyed what they did with the Greyjoys this season, randomly. I mean, they're obviously, sad, damp, grey people. Yeah, Theon reuniting with his sister and trying to put some sense of self back together was, I quite liked that storyline for what it was. They didn't over-dwell on it. They just showed him and his sister slowly travelling towards Daenerys and having a few revealing conversations. I quite liked it. I quite like Yara as a character. I think she's one of these fun characters who's always good, but she's on screen and isn't overexposed, so we're not yet sick of her.
No, you're right. And I think Theon as a character has been on one of the most complex journeys, from Stark hostage in Series 1 to trying to prove himself in his own right to being beaten down by Ramsay Bolton and becoming Reek, to now re-establishing himself, but maybe a bit more self-aware than he was before. Sansa, I think, has gone on a really good journey. She certainly gained some backbone and some...
Well, I think this is what people wanted to see from Sansa when she had her big walking out of a room looking powerful in a dress moment. Was at the end of season 4, I think it was.
Yeah.
But then they had that slight diversion in series 5 where she had to go and get nabbed by Ramsay Bolton instead.
Yeah, but I'm glad they are moving her character forwards in that way. And she's got Brienne...
Where was Brienne anyway? Oh, Brienne was last seen sailing gently away from River One, wasn't she?
Well, she went to enlist the Blackfish.
Unsuccessfully.
But and also they moved Bran forwards. It was a clever way of filling in lots of the backstory, including finally revealing who Jon Snow's parents are.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. If only it was done in such a sort of low-key way that if you hadn't been paying like full attention to all the families and lineages, there's a good chance you wouldn't have had a clue what was going on.
Yeah.
But he's meant to be Rhaegar Targaryen's son, so he's Daenerys' nephew, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, Rhaegar is Daenerys' older brother.
He's meant to be Rhaegar Targaryen's son as well as Lyanna Stark's son, so he's this sort of great unifying force, I guess, which only adds to the sense of him as the general messiah.
Yeah, and now he's also the King of the North.
Yeah, I've seen people discussing whether they, in the end of the series, they ship Jon with Sansa or Daenerys. It's like, I know the show is a bit more open-minded about incest, but is there not a non-incest option?
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think at this point, now he's come back from the dead, he's renounced his vows as a man of the Night's Watch. I mean, I guess he says my watch is ended because he died. And, it's a vow until death.
Well, yeah, I guess if for anyone who says, why did they bother killing him off if they brought him back? Well, so that they could get out of that loophole of him having to stay on Night Watch till he died, obviously. It's a win-win.
I did especially really like the Battle of the Bastards, episode 9. Opening with the Marine naval battle with Daenerys. We finally get to see some dragons cook some people on a large scale. That was pretty impressive. And then the Battle of the Bastards itself, I thought was really well done. It really did show the brutality of what medieval conflict was like, and the way it would work. How sort of being trapped by pikemen and slowly sort of driven into is how unpleasant it is and how visceral it is. And in the past, they've cut away from some of the up closeness of the battles. I always thought it was to save money. Like in the first series, they kind of gloss over the battle because Tyrion gets hit on the head and that's it. And then in later series, then like the Battle of Blackwater's at night, again probably to save money. And as they've got more money along, the battles have got a bit more elaborate. But that one, the Battle of the Bastards, they really got into the nitty gritty of and the mud and the gore, and it really was very visceral. And
yeah, I mean, I must admit, the last time they did a whole episode battle sequence, which was, I think, the Watchers on the Wall, the attack on the wall in the end of series 4. I don't know, I felt that episode sort of went on a bit and didn't really say much beyond look at the violence. But no, I thought the Battle of the Bastards, yeah, that was really good. I really, really liked that. I thought that had exactly the right amount of fighting, with the right amount of preamble, a bit of cutting away to other storylines, and yeah, the necessary catharsis, obviously, when Ramsay Bolton gets eaten by dogs.
And that was good. And then it nicely resolved that story and then propelled us on to the next story, which is the kind of takes us back to the main plot. So that whole Bolton Northern kind of, which is enough plot for a novel in its own right, but in the vastness of Game of Thrones, it's basically a subplot.
Well, I mean, he's been around for a while now, old Ramsay Bolton. I think, he first appeared when he started torturing Theon in season 3. So seeing him get his after 4 years does at least make the season feel like it's had an ending. I feel like something substantial has been underlined.
Yeah.
But yeah, and he killed Vickon as well. A death I might have cared more about if the character had appeared since season 2.
He's the first Stark son or daughter to die since Robb Stark in series 3.
Yeah, they did use Ramsay quite brutally to just, tie off a few unused characters, didn't they? Sort of like, oh look, it's Osha. Oh look, it's Lord Bolton. Vickon. Oh, and his random mother-in-law.
Yep. Well, he was a properly nasty character. So
well, if you're going to have a character whose main purpose is sadistically killing people, I guess you might as well just feed your unwanted characters to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I commented in the last episode, I think during the Orange is the New Black segment, but I felt Game of Thrones has been less cruel this year. Which, friend of the show, listener and booktubing person Claire Russo did call me on Twitter on whether, it was really that uncruel, considering we've had Ramsay arrowing Vickon and also killing some other people on screen, and there's been... Yeah, I don't know, maybe it's just... Maybe you say it wasn't cruel enough was just a bit too glib, I don't know.
Well, there's nothing on the same level as, say, the Red Wedding.
Maybe it's not cruelty, though. Maybe it's just the slightly predictable trajectory of it. I will say, the High Sparrow Red Keep massacre at the start of episode 10, followed by the sort of instant off-you-pop suicide of Tommen. That was cruel.
That's quite a lot of characters, yeah.
Not even in terms of body count. That was the sort of unpredictable, off-the-edge twist that was off-the-edge a distasteful thing to say about Tom and suicide? But the sort of distasteful twist I'm after. I don't know. Maybe it's just a sense that less that it was being less cruel to its characters and more that it was being less cruel to me. Like, I don't know, I wanted it to sort of go in unpredictable and horrifying directions. And to be honest, Ramsay Bolton sadistically killing minor characters is, by the start of season 6, that's basically day ending in Y territory, isn't it?
Well, when you did make those comments to defend past Nick, it was before you'd seen Battle of the Bastards and the final episode, so where a lot of the death and mayhem was confined to those 2 episodes.
What you want is the sort of the tension, the sort of idea that you genuinely don't know what's going to happen next, that things are scary and unpredictable, and that characters could do something awful at any moment. I mean, prior to the Battle of the Bastards, my favourite bits was just probably Hodor. Yeah, and possibly the bits where Sandor Clegane came back, actually, because even though his new mates in the church getting killed was somewhat predictable, it was...
Yeah.
It felt like it had a bit of heaviness to it. I don't know why. I thought his conversations with the Ian McShane preacher were quite good.
Yeah, I was about to say that for a show that is known for killing off its characters, and also when someone dies, they stay dead, when a lot of shows kill their main characters and then awkwardly unwind that. Yeah, the Hound is one of the few people who has come back from the dead. One where, he didn't die, he was just badly wounded. And I enjoyed his episode. Kind of seemed like a little sort of self-contained short story in the wider universe. I don't know how he's going to link into the main plot line.
Well, I think a lot of people were expecting him to then find his way back to King's Landing for the finale and then fight his brother, the zombie, in Cersei's trial by combat or something. But then, of course, there was a scene in like episode 8 or 9 that explicitly ruled out trial by combat, and then you could just hear the fans' little hearts dropping across the world.
Well, that was the part of the political machinations going on in King's Landing, which I know obviously I didn't suspect them to end with the whole place being blown to pieces.
There were bits of talk about wildfire and how Cersei had found it and stuff.
And she'd enlisted the slightly crazy maester, the one who looks like he was kicked out by the others and who turned the mountain into some kind of Frankenstein monster.
Yes, I enjoy him, the crazy maester. I don't know why, he's just good.
Shout out to some minor characters that I really like this year.
Hit me.
Possibly character of the season's got to be Lyanna Mormont, the 10-year-old who is about like more badass than anyone else in the show. I did like the meme going. I did like the meme going around Facebook that said if she had dragons, it'd be over in 3 series.
There's no exaggeration in this segment, I'm telling you. I don't know. I thought I liked Jamie this season, actually. I thought he got to do a bit of his sort of conflicted shit. I think he's got some interesting and slightly creepy things going on.
I thought Jamie was very good this series, and I think that, now that he knows what Cersei did, killing all those people, and pretty much driving their son to kill himself, I think he might turn against her. He might sign up with Daenerys.
I think, to be honest, as considering his previous made life achievement was killing a ruler when they went a bit too crazy and got some wildfire, then yeah, I think it might be time for him to do his signature move.
Yeah, on his own sister, though.
It's true. I imagine there will be some hand-wringing. But, considering his obsessive love for Cersei is one of his other main character traits, other than killing crazy rulers, I imagine there'll be a bit of back and forth. To be honest, that seems so telegraphed. I sort of suspect they might zag away from it. They'll build up to the idea that Jaime's going to kill Cersei, and then something will happen to stop him, like him dying. But yeah, I think there was a bit of a season that, as you say, felt like a slightly slow extension of season 5. But I felt, after the last 2 episodes, which were a sort of tie-up to about the last 2 or 3 years, it's hard for that not to feel satisfying, really. That was basically, the season finale of 2, if not 3 years of the show.
Exactly, yeah. Like you said, very much the end of Act 2.
Of course, this was the first season when they don't have a book to base it on. Did you feel there was a different feel to it at all?
Speaking to people who have read the books, because I've not read any of the books, there seemed to be, for some people, there was a real sense of heightened interest in that, I don't know what's going to happen this series. Almost anything could happen. Although I believe the Greyjoy plots in this series were from book 4 or something.
Some of them were. I think they burnt through a lot of Greyjoy plot in about 3 scenes, to be honest. A lot of the book 4 Greyjoy stuff, I think, only goes up to when they left the island, basically.
Yeah.
So a lot of the stuff with them travelling to meet Daenerys, I don't think was in the books, although I haven't read the books for years, so someone could well be able to tell me I'm wrong there.
But I also spoke to some people who had read the books and were kind of a bit disappointed that basically they were being spoiled for book events, especially Hodor's death.
Yes, I think that was the first big plot reveal twist that has definitely been on TV before the books. And there was definitely, when that episode aired, there was definitely a renewed howl of rage from angry book fans in some corners of the internet I saw.
But it's difficult for me to judge how this series how it felt different having not read any of the books?
I think there was a feeling that they were sort of dashing a bit quicker downhill than they had been. I don't know whether that's just a consequence of getting towards the end. I think stories do speed up when you get towards the end generally. But I think there was less concern with, we're going to send these characters to that place, which means we need to have lots of scenes of little toddling journeys. There was quite a lot of, they're there. If anyone wants to tell me how Varys teleported from Marine to Dawn, then back to Marine.
Yeah, that was quite geography bending.
Exactly. In a George R. R. Martin season, he would have left Marine to go to Dawn, probably at the start of the season, got there in the middle, and then come back at the end.
And had to encounter several other things along the way.
Exactly. So yeah, I think there was a bit more concerned with plot, and less concerned with sort of long journey scenes with some dialogue.
I mean, I was really pleased with this series, especially the end, and I'm very excited for the next two series. If they can stick to their plan and actually, wrap it up in two series and draw it to a definite conclusion. It's just as we were saying about in the opening, that it annoys you when they spin out things too long just to get more out of them, whereas they need to, have a story to tell and tell that story. I get the sense, certainly from the last two episodes, that is what they're doing. I'd be disappointed if they suddenly backpedal and say, actually, there's going to be 3 to 4 more series.
I would agree. I mean, I think there's some tension between HBO and the producers, but I think basically HBO wanted to go a bit longer, but the producers seem quite determined to have their 2-year wrap-up. And I imagine, hopefully, considering HBO are meant to be, the credible artistic network where shows end when they're meant to, rather than 3 years later in a haze of being terrible. So I'm hoping they'll get their Series 8 finish. I love this show, and that's why it has to die.
They could always do a prequel, something. Better Call Ned, anyone?
Okay, and second up today, it's Independence Day Resurgence, the sequel to the 90s action film Independence Day. The aliens are back. A bunch of characters, some of which you'll remember from the previous film, many of whom you won't, have to team up and stop them from destroying the world landmark by landmark by landmark. It's a global epic for our times. So, we saw this. What did you think, Alastair?
Well, what struck me when I was watching it is that this is quite an unusual film to make a sequel to. I mean, the original came out in 1996, I believe, and it was, for better or for worse, a revolutionary film when it came out. It did change what summer blockbusters were like. It did open up cinema to a new level of visual spectacle, and it was really spectacular, very engaging, entertaining film when it came out, but it's very light on plot and it's very light on character. So I don't see why there was a need to make a sequel. Why, no one really wanted to check back in with these characters or find out more about this plot. It's not like, Star Wars, which again, visually amazing. But, it's got great plot and great characters. And it's really like, man, I want to find out what happened next. You leave Independence Day going, cool, that's spectacular. And, I'm glad they managed to solve that at the end. This film does seem very much like, well, let's just do the same film again. Just the spaceship's bigger this time. The destruction is bigger, but the huge sort of city destruction that we saw in the original Independence Day, people hadn't seen anything like that when it came out. But now it's kind of quite passé. I mean, we've had Avengers and Avengers 2 and Man of Steel and X-Men Apocalypse, all the
Transformers films, yeah.
We've seen cities be destroyed over and over again since Independence Day, so I'm not really sure why they felt the need to do it again. With characters and plotline that people didn't really care about.
Yeah, I was amazed how much it actually felt like a 90s action film. Like they've really, gone back to the well and just taken the water back out of that well and represented it to us. It's like, the completely evil aliens who I don't think even ever speak a single line in terms of communication, just turn up and are defeated by a group of mostly whites, mostly Americans delivering sort of semi-quips.
The few jokes they had weren't even that funny, partly because this film is terribly paced. It is really terribly paced. It is so fast. It basically starts and there's about 5 minutes of calm before it just lurches into an orgy of sort of destruction and spectacle. And it never slows up the whole time, including when main characters die. They don't even have a kind of heartstring pulling soft moment. They don't even stop so you can appreciate the funny lines when they go by, when they're destroying central London and Jeff Goldblum goes, "We do like to get the monuments." It kind of goes straight over that at such speed. I mean,
I've got that down in my notes as the one joke as well. Was that actually the only real joke?
Yeah,
pretty much. Do we just remember it because it was in the trailers? I'm not really sure.
The only other joke which made me laugh is there's a bit when the alien spaceship's coming down and it's obviously destroying everything it lands on, and you see this wave of destruction move towards the White House. And the original Independence Day was very famous that the poster was the White House exploding. The trailer had the White White House exploding in it. It was like, that was the image, like aliens blew up the White House. That was kind of the idea they sold, like the whole thing. And it was very famous at the time. And then they had this like wave of destruction moving, and it stops just before the White House, and the White House isn't touched. And I thought, like, okay, that's quite clever and quite funny. So they got those two jokes, but I think one is a blink and you miss it, and the other is you have to really remember what marketing campaigns for films were like in 1996.
Well, if you're going to make a sequel, you can probably get away with an in-joke on that level. Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't be entirely surprised to discover that script has been sitting in a drawer for 10 to 15 years, to be honest. Aside from the special effects, there wasn't anything massively modern about it.
No, and it doesn't have a lot of the sort of irony or sort of postmodern appreciation that a lot of films have, post-Avengers.
Part of me feels that, maybe there's such thing as too much postmodern irony. But, on the other hand, we're now giving this a bit of a slating, and we also gave Warcraft a bit of a slating for just turning up and trotting out the tropes without a hint of irony or self-awareness.
Yeah, this is a very earnest disaster movie, just as Warcraft was a very earnest fantasy movie. But that's not bad in itself. Being an earnest action disaster science fiction movie isn't a bad thing if you do a good job of telling a good story. Like, the original Independence Day is paced really well. Like, the aliens appear and they kind of float around and everyone thinks they're peaceful and, like, it's all nice, and it builds up. And you slowly realise they're all like converging on the major kind of population centres, and then they all attack at once. And it builds to this point of tension, and then there's just like huge explosion. And it goes into an action scene. It was a success because it was well made. This film is not. This film, like I say, just hurtles along at 1,000,000 miles an hour through explosion after explosion without letting up. I mean, and it was quite long. There were loads of characters. Almost none of them got any character development. I think the two pilots got some, and that was about it. This film obviously didn't need to be longer, so if they did jettison the character development, then I'm glad it's not 2.5 hours long. I don't know. They seem to have jettisoned absolutely everything that was slower than the pace of an action scene. So the film is very, very oddly paced.
Yeah, I mean, having compared it to Warcraft in terms of the very earnest enactment of tropes, I think I prefer this to Warcraft, possibly just because the characters did feel that little bit more human.
Yeah, they did feel a lot less like the stereotypes.
They didn't just turn up and deliver their stereotype lines. There was, everyone, for the most part, at least, had a bit of a quirk, a bit of a sort of human wanting of something. There was a bit of more actual meaningful feeling relationships, but they were, meaningful feeling might be a strong word. They were there, but they were quite underserved.
Yeah, and I think there were too many characters, and as you said, like, there were a lot of characters from the original ones they brought back. I think some characters, revisiting them to have that continuity of the original film, was good, like having Bill Pullman reprising the role of President Whitmore, who was the president in the original film. That was good, but like, do they need to bring back like the scientists who no one really remembers?
For a sequel that's coming like 20-something years. Is it just 20 years?
Yeah.
At least 2 decades after the original. I did feel like it leaned quite hard on the original. It's like, it didn't seem to make much effort to make me care that much about, say, Jeff Goldblum. He was just, a dude. And considering he's Jeff Goldblum and he's actually quite charismatic, you think they could have given him at least a couple of scenes where he actually, introduces himself and seems cool, rather than just turning up and as if, you know who I am.
Yeah.
Not really. I know you're Jeff Goldblum, but that's about it.
I mean, contrast though, in that he just shows up and does his lines. I mean, like, contrast that to him in like Jurassic Park when he's like the fun one, the creative one. He brings sparkle to that film. In this film, he brings po-faced seriousness to a film that's quite po-faced and quite serious.
You can't lay into the actor too much. You can't deliver jokes if there's no jokes in the script. But
valid point.
Yeah, I felt like they could have given him some, and all the old characters really, a bit more build-up. I mean, they spent a while building up. A while in this film's terms, they spent like a good couple of minutes building up the sort of past and the history of those new test pilots, because they actually were new characters.
Yeah, they were the only characters of any kind of nuance and backstory.
Exactly. They gave them the backstory build-up time because they're new characters and they haven't had it before, and seems to just assume they could just skip doing it for the old characters. Like, I know I saw this film when I was younger because I roughly remember it ending with Will Smith uploading a virus or something. Yeah. But let's not pretend that means I'm still invested in Jeff Goldblum.
No, or the scientists who I barely remember.
I don't remember them at all. I remember Jeff Goldblum and Bill Pullman being in it. That's potentially about it, to be honest.
And I think he had a daughter who's now the love interest of the Liam Hemsworth character. It's just, there were so many characters in this film. All right, and a lot of them were like, superfluous. Like Jeff Goldblum's dad, who again seems to be in it because he was in the original film and for no discernible purpose, who has the most insane pointless storyline in that he kind of wanders around for a bit, picks up a load of kids, drives around with some kids for a bit, then picks up some more kids in a school bus, and then drives them into the middle of a war. I mean,
see, to be fair, he was, they were just trying to give it a bit more of a tangible final showdown. They didn't want it to just be CGI planes firing at CGI aliens. They wanted to, have really
cool
see that tentacle interacting with that CGI bus.
There is a moment, and this is a massive spoiler for anyone, but at the end, right, they have to kill the queen because, like in all these sci-fi things, the aliens are a hive, and you kill the queen, and then that's the end of it. That works quite well as a plot structure. So they're trying to kill the queen by luring her onto the salt flats, and then launching a nuclear missile at her. And then just before they get to that point, along comes Jeff Goldblum's dad, played by the town planner fella from Numbers, cannons into the middle of this salt flat in a school bus full of kids. And they're basically, oh my God, we can't launch a nuke. There's children in the way. And I'm basically like, I can't believe this has been written as a serious, dramatic subplot to this film. This is not like Austin Powers. This is not a plot line from a Simpsons episode. This is like generally supposed to be taken seriously.
But it's just another way that it's, it just feels a bit retrograde, It's like, come on. We know it's the 21st century. We know now that the American government would not launch a nuke just because there were some children in the way.
Yeah. But also, we genuinely expect us to be like, oh my God, kids in the way at the last minute. I mean, it's just, I don't know, if you see the film, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen the film, go and see it, and then watch out for the kids showing up in the middle of the nuclear test range at the last minute.
It's basically the entire premise of the last few minutes of action, so yeah, you'll probably spot it.
But, I mean, and there was so many, completely pointless characters. There was that government bureaucrat guy who's there for no reason.
Another character who, to be honest, had more of a character arc than most of the veteran characters.
But I'm not really sure what the point in him was. There was some...
But he got to have his sort of possibly borderline racist moment at the end when that bloke from Africa says, "You have the heart of a warrior, do you know?"
So they go to Africa at the beginning, and they obviously Africa is where warlords are. So they have to go and talk to a warlord who has lots of guns, and in this amazing moment of continental stereotyping, which has been quite a lot of through various things this year and last year, but this one really does take the biscuit of they go to Africa, there's a warlord, and then they recruit this warlord to knock around with them, whose main thing is that he has knives and likes chopping things up.
Yeah, he has a machete, yeah. He randomly befriends this sort of spineless bureaucrat, and who keeps asking if he could use his machete.
Yeah, and I don't know what they were where they were going with
I don't really know. I don't know if they just received the film and were like, well, we've got this cast from the 90s, it's nearly all white people. The one black actor isn't coming back. We should probably use some method of recruiting some diversity into this, so it at least resembles a 2016 film in some way.
Yeah, and I guess they wanted to make it like a global conflict, because one of the plot lines in this is that the world has united and set aside their differences after it was nearly wiped out. In the previous film, which does sort of make sense. There's moon bases now, and there's kind of one of the main pilots is Chinese, and
to appeal to the all important Chinese audience. Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, and yeah, so also, we got to get, if this is going to be a world story, it can't just be kind of America, China, and a bit when England gets crushed by a spaceship. So they throw in African stereotypes, which semi-racist African stereotypes makes everything better.
The African warlord and the Chinese test pilot, none of whom really do anything. And Will Smith's stepson, who, to be honest, even he doesn't get that much to do. He gets basically out, he just gets to be Liam Hemsworth's junior.
Yeah, they have a few friends.
Well done.
There's a new president who also doesn't have much plot. Interesting point. Hollywood seems to be convinced that Hillary Clinton will be the next president of America, because in order to say this film doesn't look like it's out of date really quickly, they've put in a female president. You saw this in quite a few films just before Barack Obama got elected in 2008, that films would started putting in black presidents so that they could look...
By black presidents, you mean Morgan Freeman specifically?
Yeah, usually Morgan Freeman. He's your go-to president actor who's African-American. And now, so it's partly so the film doesn't look out of date really quickly when a monumentous historical event happens.
Yeah, no, good point. I didn't actually spot that, but you are right. That is probably one of their few token concessions towards the fact that it's coming out in 2016 and not 1998.
Yeah, and also so it doesn't look, if we look back at it from the future, it looks contemporary rather than old-fashioned.
Yeah, Oliver Ashbrook Cooper has tweeted in to say that Independence 2 equals Starship Troopers minus irony.
That's a pretty good definition. It's also Starship Troopers minus aliens getting splattered. One of the great things about Starship Troopers is watching the bugs just kind of be smeared everywhere, which is hilarious. Whereas in this, the aliens are, again, it's just a bit too po-faced for any of that.
Yeah, well, well, the aliens don't really get to do anything. I don't know whether that was a technical limitation or a imagination limitation, but yeah, they just really see them on screen for about 5 minutes total, and they mostly just turn up and immediately get shot.
Well, that was similar to the first film. In the first film, the spaceships come down, they start blowing things up. They capture one at one point because Will Smith punches one and says, "Welcome to Earth," in possibly the only joke in the original film. And then there's a bit when, like, the Bill Pullman president, kind of, at one point he just, like, he looks at one and grabs his head and goes, oh, I saw into their mind. They're like locusts. They go from world to world, killing everything. And that's what they do. But that's pretty much the only bit of plot development in the whole thing. And when you find out what the deal is. And it was pretty much at that level this time.
It'd be nice if they'd recapped that in some casual way, just so I knew why Bill Pullman had a telepathic link with the aliens for no explained reason.
And I think that's why there's a few characters in this film who were kind of seem to be suffering some kind of psychological fallout from being psychically linked to the aliens, because it was briefly mentioned in the first film, which came out 20 years ago.
Yeah, but yeah, I did enjoy the brief writing out of Will Smith. He's like, he had his portrait at the wall of the White House or wherever it was, and it's like, yes, he saved the world, and then he died on a test flight. Like, fuck you, Will Smith. You won't come back, you won't write us a cool Raps theme song for our film. We'll do anything we can to. We'll write your character out off screen in the most humiliating way we can think of.
Although some of the things the films did do well is that it was pretty... There's quite a lot of spectacle. The giant alien spaceship, this time it's about the size of the moon. It's pretty massive. There's a good line when it says, "It's coming down over the Atlantic Ocean." Which bit? All of it.
That is a very disaster movie line, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a very... Yeah, you've got to deliver that one without any irony.
And see, that's an entertaining lack of irony, though. That I enjoyed. If the whole film had dialogue on that level, I'd have probably liked it more.
Yeah. So yeah, that was pretty good. They had some impressive space battles and kind of fighter pilot battles.
It went along. The plot, I vaguely understood what the plot was and what the stakes were. The characters did at least have enough definition for me to, follow their little journeys along and not just spend too much time thinking, my God, I don't care. So, which again puts it slightly above Warcraft, and yeah, it just didn't quite elevate. It's quite standard material.
When I was watching it, I was enjoying it more than being cloyingly aware that it was terrible, which I can't say the same for Warcraft or Batman vs Superman.
It doesn't stand up to intense analysis, really, but if you do just want to turn your brain off and watch a middling alien invasion film, I'm sure there are worse out there. It's
certainly spectacular, and it's certainly full of destruction and full of great special effects. The thing is, the original, which does live up to the original, but the original really did push boundaries in terms of effects and in terms of spectacle. This film doesn't so much, and which makes it ultimately just another quite empty summer blockbuster, when the original did at least change things. Well,
yeah, as you said, another film about cities being destroyed in 2016. Ooh. But yeah, I mean, they could have, I don't know quite what they could have done instead, tried to go even higher on the scale and make a genuinely epic film about planets smashing into each other and just destruction on a cosmic scale and making that feel visceral and real. I don't know. But yeah, the only way they could have really made it feel like it was doing the same thing was to try and up the ante. And they haven't done that. They've just kept the ante at roughly the same level. But unfortunately, everyone else has also reached and in some cases surpassed that level.
Yeah, because the ante was pretty much pushed to max by the original. I mean, it was like the world is going to be annihilated on the greatest day in the year for America, and America has to rise up to defend itself against impossible odds. I mean, the ante from the trailer is worth going back and watching that trailer, because that trailer, especially when it came out in 1996, was gripping. Like, we're like, wow, what is that film? I have to go and see it.
Yeah.
I don't know if the original film really stands up to a rewatch, but that trailer is pretty impressive. Yeah, but again, like, they didn't do that again. They just made another sequel, and another big action movie sequel.
And of course, it ends on some setup for another sequel, but I don't know if I expect that to happen.
It depends how well it does at the box office, I guess.
It hasn't done amazingly, actually. I did wonder if it was going to take loads of money in America, just because feels like a very big American film. But it seems to have kind of underperformed, to be honest, so who knows if they'll get that sequel.
Well, 1996 is pretty much the height of that American enthusiasm. I mean, like, the economy was booming, Bill Clinton was in the White House playing the saxophone, it was brilliant to be America, and everyone was in the mood for a really fun story about how awesome America is. 20 years later, the global economy's threatened. We're all very unsure of our place in the world. We're all a bit more suspect about power and authority.
But enough about Brexit for now.
Yeah, people aren't really as enthusiastic for such a film that's quite America. Fuck yeah.
Well, yeah, I think America Fuck Yeah as a concept for a film did take a bit of a battering once we got past 9/11 and past the initial surge of patriotism after that, and people started to question authority quite a bit more.
But we're just not as confident a civilization as we were 20 years ago. I mean, it really does show in these two films. Next, we will be discussing Within the Wires, the new podcast from Welcome to Night Vale creator Jeffrey Kramer and co-written by Janina Mathewson, who also narrates it. Within the Wires is an immersive audio story where the listener hears a relaxation tape being played to a subject who's been studied in a dystopian medical facility. There's not a lot of plot or character, but there is some quite intense and unsettlingly creepy atmosphere. I thought it was quite a strange but really interesting podcast. What were your thoughts, Nick?
Similar to yours, and I guess I thought it was interesting. I don't know if it's the sort of thing I generally listen to for fun, though. It's sort of like Welcome to Night Vale has this sort of combination of plot and atmosphere. Alice Isn't Dead is a bit more plot driven, and this seems to be mostly atmosphere with a very sort of thin bit of plot along the side.
Yeah, I thought exactly the same thing, that this is, this seems to be a podcast made entirely out of these slightly abstract bits of Welcome to Night Vale when Cecil, sort of talks on a sort of bizarre tangent for a while. Whereas, again, Alice Isn't Dead is the kind of driving plot. Both are very much, kind of a classic, what happens when band members make solo albums, where you get a lot of what that one person brought to the band.
I feel bad being too mean about it, because I don't think it's badly done. It's the part of the Welcome to Night Vale cocktail that interests me least, I guess.
Yeah.
Personally, I mean, as a pragmatic monster, I appreciate a certain amount of plot drivenness. I could listen to this and go, that is very atmospheric, that is very nicely read, and quite nicely written, and so on. But yeah, I mean, I probably am going to listen to the rest of it just because I'm kind of curious how the tape gimmick's going to work. I feel like do they have brilliant ideas for how it'll go, or is it going to end up being a bit restrictive? I don't really know.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that it's an interesting thing because it doesn't really have any plot or character. It is very much like, you kind of get a bit of a sense of the world, that this is a medical facility, it's dystopian, people don't have parents, you have your siblings taken away from you. It's very hive-like society. It's a very kind of extremely totalitarian society, the point when they seem to have broken down the individual completely in the family and like everything's been replaced by the collective. Some kind of, horrendous Stalinistic dystopian future. But because you're listening to a tape within an experiment that you have no knowledge of the subject or the much of the world, it's really hard to get a sense of plot or character or anything other than the atmosphere it creates.
Presumably either we're going to find out there's something different or odd or weirder going on with these tapes, or they're just going to have to break the format completely by about episode 4 in order to actually move some sort of story forward. Yeah,
I'm interested, like you say, where this is going. The first episode I was very like, okay, that's a good primer for a story, but where does it go?
It's the sort of atmosphere building bit you'd quite like as, like, I guess the sort of the cold open in a TV show, right? The bit which sort of establishes a mood and a vague idea of setting. But I sort of felt like, okay, you've established a mood and an idea of setting, and now I'm ready for the story to begin. Obviously now I have to wait 2 weeks, or well, to be fair, as of when we're recording this, about 4 days, but still, for the next part of the story. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I should learn from this and just basically save the rest of the episodes up and canon them over the course of a week or so, I don't know.
Yeah, it's very much, it felt like the prologue to a novel, as I felt, which is like a great way of setting the scene, but like, I'd be interested to see how they bring character or plot into it, or if they try to do a whole podcast that doesn't contain character or plot at all.
I'm assuming the insects motif is coming back, considering it's in the logo. Maybe it's meant to be more just evoking the way the society works, rather than actually, here's an explicit insect.
Yeah.
I don't know, I feel like for the format that they've released it in, it's a bit weird to put out a whole episode which is basically just atmosphere building. I don't know what the solution is, put out 2 episodes at once, or make the first one a double-sized special, who knows. But I listened to the first side of the tape, and I was expecting the second side to move on from the atmospherics and do something.
It seems to have a bit more substance to it than the first one.
Yeah, the atmosphere of the insects being pulled apart by the child.
Yeah,
it was very creepy. It was very like, I listened to it twice, and yeah, I feel that, particularly when you sort of close your eyes and concentrate on the words, it is quite easy to sort of feel that washing over you.
Yeah, it's well written and well done, but I think it really needs something to anchor it. I mean, maybe my tastes are just a bit too traditional or formulaic. I mean, this story is quite abstract. If you want something that does something different, I mean, I was just complaining about Independence Day Resurgence, saying it's just like any other summer blockbuster. I mean, this is someone trying to do something different with an emerging medium that people haven't really created the rules for storytelling in yet. Or at least they don't seem to be cast iron like they are in film. So certainly points for innovation, points for trying something new. I'm just not completely convinced yet.
I have been keeping up with Alice Isn't Dead, though. That's been good fun.
Yeah, it's been going very well. Yeah, I've really enjoyed that. The plot has moved on nicely, developed. There's been some explanation, not just layers and layers of confusion. It's definitely the stronger of the two solo projects, but I do feel they are beady eyes and high-flying birds to Oasis. One's all song, no swagger. One's all swagger, no song.
Oh, so you've slightly cooled on Alice Isn't Dead then, because I'm sure when we covered the first episode, you were very sort of, I don't know, I might prefer this to Night Vale.
I'd say it's got the potential, certainly, to overtake Night Vale. Maybe it needs a bit more to develop. We'll have to wait, because Night Vale's been going so long and has so much story. It's a difficult comparison to make at this point. And Alice Isn't Dead really grabs you at the beginning, especially the opening episode is really gets you. And there's been some great episodes since.
Alice Isn't Dead's first episode was possibly still one of her best episodes. That was a killer. That was a great first episode. Whereas this, it's well done, but it didn't quite contain the big hook in quite the way Alice Isn't Dead did.
Well, the first episode of Alice Isn't Dead goes straight in with character and story. There's not very little background or build up. It's like right into kind of, you're not even necessarily sure what's going on. In fact, that's part of the appeal. You're not really sure what's going on, but it is straight in there with this, grabbing you with the story. Whereas Within the Wires is starting with the world and the build up and the atmosphere, which is a different approach.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I can't really complain that the story doesn't contain as much to hook me, because there hasn't necessarily been a clear here is a story yet. So yeah, I am very curious where it's going to, Phil. I'm very intrigued, and I'm definitely going to possibly wait a few weeks and then listen to the next 2 or 3 episodes in one go, just to see what happens. But, yeah. In
terms also comparing the two solo projects, is that obviously, one seems to be the story, the other seems to be the atmosphere. What's interesting is that Alice Isn't Dead seems to be the horror and the kind of supernatural aspect of Night Vale. And Within the Wires is the kind of the totalitarian side, the kind of dystopian totalitarian side of Night Vale. Because what I liked about Night Vale is the kind of combination of outright horror. You've got like tiny people living under the bowling alley, and there's the glow cloud that takes control of things, and interdimensional beings and stuff, but also the kind of the sheriff's secret police and the bizarre helicopters and the kind of very totalitarian city government.
I don't know if it's the totalitarian as much as it is the abstraction, like the stuff about your shoulder is drifting away. Imagine the silence as your shoulder drifts away and you are ripped apart by a toddler. That's very much a sort of a voice element that's in Night Vale, and it's not really as much in Alice Isn't Dead. She doesn't talk in quite as sort of weird and abstract a way.
Yeah, it reminds me of the bit of Welcome to Night Vale when Cecil would go on a long abstract monologue, and then at the end just go, McDonald's, I'm loving it. And it's very and it's very funny. It'll be like, kind of look at the sky, look at the stars. The stars are dead. They died millions of years ago. You will die. It's millions of years. You are dead. The universe is cold and empty and meaningless. Nike, just do it. It's kind of like that, but without the punchline in the end.
Yeah, well, maybe that's the problem. Maybe I just need jokes too badly. Then again, there are no jokes in Alice Isn't Dead, so that doesn't hold either.
There's quite a lot of visceral horror, which is a good payoff. Maybe the problem Within the Wires is we haven't got any payoff yet. I mean, it's all set up.
Yeah, but then there's a sort of a content format thing. So like it or not, it's being issued in these, 25 minute, half-hour chunks, and a lot of people, possibly including us, I don't know, are going to go, I'm going to listen to the first episode and decide if I like it, because that's what you do when something is dished out in episodic chunks.
And when it's new.
So yeah, I mean, like or not, you have to make a conscious decision to go, right, we're not going to unveil any solid plot hooks by the end of episode 1.
No, that's a very valid point. There's a prospect for this to be quite scary and quite intense. The world that Within the Wires does seem genuinely quite a bleak, oppressive world. So if they can bring in the horror aspect of that, if someone tries to stand up to their system or break free, a character of some sort, I can really see how that could get some quite viscerally and present bits. I'm thinking of, the end scene of 1984 when he's in room 101. They could, if they can do that kind of stuff, then it could be really good.
kind of came away from it really thinking, well, yeah, the world sounds kind of interesting. I kind of rather had a bit more stuff explicitly in the world rather than quite as much abstracts.
Maybe they'll get to that.
Honestly, I suspect they're trying to say something about the world by having the unseen us subject person imagine themselves as a tiny thing being toyed with by larger forces. Okay, and lastly this fortnight, I recommended Alastair check out Dead Like Me, the Showtime TV show from the 2000s, featuring Ellen Muth as Georgia Lass, who becomes a Grim Reaper after she dies in no way darkly comic way involving a falling toilet seat, and meets a bunch of other Grim Reapers, including their supervisor, played by Mandy Patinkin from Homeland, without the beard, which is weird. And yeah, this is a show from Brian Fuller, who's gone on to create some other darkly comic death-related shows such as Pushing Daisies and Hannibal. And yeah, I loved it a lot when I first watched it when it was on. I enjoyed revisiting it a lot. Alastair had not seen it before. What did you think?
It's got a really great dark sense of humour. It's really, really spot on. Like, it's kind of the first episode which begins with the kind of the pointlessness of life. That she's trying to get a job in a temp agency, and there's a very much sense of we spend all day pushing papers around for no discernible purpose, and then on her lunch break she's killed by the toilet seat from the Mir space station.
Yes.
I really liked the dark comicness of it. It really very funny. Like everything between being killed by the toilet seat from Mir, and again in the first episode a woman gets a piano dropped on her. In the third episode, animal rights activist is eaten by a bear, or mauled at least by a bear that he's trying to save. It's all pretty dark, but pretty funny as well. It's really got that macabre humour, which is it's great when it's done well, but it's very hard to do well. You need to get that perfect element of ridiculousness, darkness, but not so silly that people stop taking it seriously. But so it has to have a bit of some actual moments of emotion and sadness, but also not too soppy that it becomes a bit much, and it kind of really hits that sweet spot.
Yeah, like watching it again for the first time in probably the best part of a decade. I forgot what an actual dick George is in those early episodes. I mean, possibly I just didn't care as much when I watched it in my sort of nihilistic late teens, early 20s years, and I was just, content for people with office jobs. Yeah, I'm there. Yeah, no, is actually just wandering around being a dick to people.
I think when you're a teenager, you respond better to teenagers being rude to authority figures. And also, the first time you watch the show, you don't pick up on those layers of subtlety. First, you go with the character, and you experience what the characters experience. And when you rewatch it, you can then kind of distance yourself from that character a bit and see how they fit in with other characters. And good shows have that. They have those levels of nuance. You can rewatch things and kind of be invested with different characters' points of view. That's the sign of a good show.
Yeah, it really worked for me, actually. I've massively enjoyed rewatching it. All the dark comedy, as you say, very much holds up. Obviously, it's a show about ridiculous deaths. Like, George is specifically assigned to the accidents division. So it's just about people dying in often quite stupid ways.
Yeah, she's not fortunate enough to get assigned to the division that deals with people who are old and die in a hospital bed surrounded by their family. Like, again, in the first episode, there's a bank hold-up plus explosion plus woman seeking revenge for her adulterous husband, and no one dies, but then a guy trips over and gets killed by a revolving door.
Yeah.
It's very much if you laughed at the opening bits of 6 Feet Under, then or at least the ones that were supposed to be funny.
Yeah.
Then that's kind of like the level I think it hits. But as we've been talking about how grim it is, like how grimly comic it is, also can be really quite sad at times, which I think it gets that well. Like in the first episode, I think it's her first task George is assigned as a Grim Reaper is to take the soul of like an 8-year-old girl who dies in a train crash. And you can see she just doesn't want to do it, and they're kind of pleading with the universe that, no, it's not fair that children die and bad people live into old age. They kind of get across the metaphysics of it, the fact the universe is a cold place that's not really aware of you or particularly cares about you as an individual, and it is tragic. So it's tragic enough to make you feel for them, and also to make it not seem like an episode of Tom and Jerry when just things come flying out of the sky and people get smeared all over the place. Like I say, walking that line is difficult, and it really does walk that line well.
Well, yeah, and obviously, at the end of each episode, there's usually some sort of emotional bit, although it's more of a character-driven meander than I remember. For some reason, I expect it to be a bit more sort of death of the week, but to be honest, the deaths of the week often do, to the extent that they're there, kind of take secondary place to George and the Grim Reapers just wandering around.
It's certainly very character-driven. I'd say, like, there doesn't seem to be the arc plot that there is certainly character-driven. There doesn't seem to be much extra personal conflict. in this universe. So there's not extra personal conflict that creates any sort of art plot. It's very much driven by George's personal conflict, her adapting to being dead and being a Grim Reaper, and her interpersonal conflicts, her relationship with the other Reapers, and her sort of now slightly odd relationship with her family now that she's dead. And obviously they're not aware she's a Reaper.
Yeah, I think an arc plot emerges more in future series. I think at the moment, because obviously it's the first few episodes of the show, you know, there's a lot to be mined from George adjusting to this, and obviously because of her sort of anti-job, anti-responsibility ranting at the start of the show, making the thrust of the show her being forced to grow up and accept that she has responsibilities now is a fairly sizable theme to be dealing with.
It's a coming-of-age story.
Yeah, and the other characters are all good as well. I mean, the other the other four main Reapers are all good characters who I think at the moment it's mostly George's story just because she's the new audience surrogate type character, but they all have good bits in these episodes and they have a lot more good bits as the show goes along.
You've got a sense of a background of a couple of them so far at the beginning. There's a bit of intro, but you haven't got much character development. I do like the fact that Reapers still have to have jobs. So Reapers are the undead. They walk around. They are visible to humans. They're not ghosts. They can eat food and they can sort of touch, interact with other people. They don't seem to be capable of being hurt or dying. And they are assigned souls to harvest for the next life or whatever else. But they still have to have apartments and food, and so they have to have jobs or survive by pilfering money from the dead. Which brings George back to the fact that she escaped her terrible temp job by being killed and then now has to go back to the same agency and take another temp job because she needs to earn some money now that she's dead, which is just a brilliant bit of dark comedy and really just highlights one of the kind of underlying themes of the show, which is life is pointless and there's no deeper meaning and it's all a long, slow, dull toil.
Yeah, and I quite like the Mason character, played by Callum Blue, who, in this particular role, looks almost exactly like the Doyle character from Angel, but anyway. Yeah, I like it. I like it partly because I get the feeling there's a sort of underlying joke being played out, because he's being introduced as this sort of general, good-looking bad boy character who slouches around and makes jokes and is very, relaxed about the whole thing and lives without a job by pilfering off corpses. And, yeah, it's made very clear that he's not just a bad boy in a sort of sanitised TV way where he's actually just slightly unhappy. He's really just a fucker.
Yeah.
He's just an idiot who constantly fucks up, constantly steals things, constantly spends all his money on drugs, constantly gets hit by cars. Yeah, he's just stubborn, childish and useless. And it's just funny.
He's a good character, yeah. Yeah, I really like the character of Roxy, the Reaper, who's she's a traffic warden. Again, like she's dead and she's harvesting souls, but she's still got to go around and check cars.
Yeah, I quite like her. She's sort of one of these sort of less is more characters in that you don't really get, at least I don't think eventually you might do in like season 2, but for a lot of it you don't really get like aggressively under her skin. She's just, getting on with it, and it's just fun to have characters like that who just don't get their angst raked over.
Yeah.
It's similar with Voob. Again, as the show goes on, you sort of dig into Voob. But I quite enjoy Mandy Patinkin here being this sort of tough but fair authority figure who's always... He still has that sort of slight paternal streak that all sort of American TV authority figures seem to have.
Yeah.
But when George doesn't do her duty or live up to her responsibilities, he is sometimes just a bit of a dick.
Yeah, I didn't recognise the guy at all from... Obviously, he's Saul in Homeland. And I honestly didn't notice until you said it right now, because I guess it's without being younger and without the beard and doing a slightly different accent.
Yeah, no, it's why I'm watching Homeland and thinking, my God, it's Rube from Dead Like Me with a beard.
Yeah, but he's very good. He's very good. He does the mentor figure very well. He's really good at basically, in a sort of slightly tired way, going, "This is the way it is. Why are you complaining about it? It's just this is the way it is."
But yeah, sadly, Dead Like Me only ran for 2 seasons, and I think Brian Fuller left it fairly early on due to the old creative differences. But it was a lot of fun. It was one of the first sort of really weird, quirky, off-kilter shows I watched, I think. So it was very influential to me in its time.
There was a film, I believe, as well.
There was a film... I mean, again, Brian Fuller was long gone by then, but there was a film continuation with the main character and I think a couple of the other Reapers. I don't think they didn't manage to get Mandy Patinkin back for that, because I think he was probably too expensive for them by that point. But yeah.
Yeah. One thing also to say is, like, I loved the opening credits.
Oh, the Grim Reaper stuff.
Yeah, which is... I mean, again, it's worth just YouTubing for yourself. Just, if you don't have time to watch Dead Like Me, just watch the opening credits on YouTube. It's so funny. It's basically a day in the life of a Grim Reaper. in that someone who, like a hooded figure with a scythe, waking up, commuting to work, doing a temp job, hanging out by the water cooler, taking, the subway home, playing some basketball in the evening. There's something hilarious just about Grim Reapers at the laundromat doing, like, washing their hooded cloaks.
One of these sort of cable TV credit sequences that goes for, like, a slightly abstract approach to showing what the show's about rather than just going, here's some pictures of the cast.
Yeah,
like the Dexter credits, I think. Those are always good. It looks really striking, and it brings home what the show's about without just banging you on the nose.
The Dexter credits nailed it with their kind of how every single aspect of him getting ready in the morning and making his breakfast is just tinged with violence. A friend of mine described it as one of the most terrifying things they'd ever sat through.
The Dead Like Me credits are perhaps not quite up there with the Dexter credits. They are very good cable TV credits. They do really catch the atmosphere, and they're just, even outside of the show, they're just, as you say, they're just funny.
Yeah. Kind of, I think that summarises perfectly the dark humour of it. And also there is a kind of point in the fact of, like, maybe the mundanity of life is worth celebrating, or maybe the mundanity of life is what's slowly killing all of us, or slowly crushing our souls. So there's a kind of a point to it. But also, it's just a brilliant piece of dark comedy. It lasts about a minute, and it's very funny.
It's a good show. It's a show I have a lot of fond memories of, and to be honest, having started watching it again, I'm kind of tempted to just go and watch the whole thing again, but there are so many other things I need to see.
I can see certainly the seeds of potential in this show that came on some that spawned a show like Hannibal, which was maybe more on the more serious side, but played, I guess, fast and loose with death and gore in the same way. And Hannibal did have its moments of dark comedy, more emphasis on the dark than the comedy.
Hannibal wanted to talk about death as well, I think, sort of all the ridiculous corpse tableaus and all the chopping meat, and it was there was something similar in how they both wanted to stare at it.
Yeah, and this sort of fascination with, and also like the American culture is such a fascination with death and violence.
Well, yeah, I think it's good that actually, it does engage with death as a thing. I mean, if you're making a show about undead people having jobs after being dead, I don't know, it would be easy to make death seem basically like it's just, I don't know, some tiny change of state, like turning 30 or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it does clearly want to hammer home the fact that even though George is dead yet walking around, the fact that she's died is a big deal, and there is a real sense of loss. Okay, so that was Dead Like Me. Alastair, what are we talking about next episode?
I've recommended to you a few art house films so far that are some of my favourites. Waltz with Bashir, Blue Velvet, A Scanner Darkly, but they've all been, although quite arty films, all quite serious and quite heavy ones. So for next episode, we're going to be looking at an art house film that's funny and silly. Partly because also I think we're looking at a quite serious art house film in the next episode. So I'm going to recommend to you The Big Lebowski by the by the Coen brothers. So you just want to basically to show you that you can make a film that's not mainstream, that's weird, that's offbeat, but is funny and silly. And it's also one of my absolute favourite films. It's a film I loved at university. It's a very student film, but it's just side-sprittingly brilliant.
Yeah, no, I can't wait. This is definitely going to be one to cross off my bucket list of things I should have seen, but we'll definitely get round to seeing at some point.
Well, I hope I haven't overhyped it too much, but it is one of my favourite films. And like I say, as someone who takes cinema very seriously, does enjoy art house cinema, sometimes it's good to pop my bubble of pomposity with something that, a straight comedy that's just funny.
And that's all the Moderate Fantasy Violence for this fortnight. Thank you for listening. If you want more related stuff, you can go to moderatefantasyviolence.com, where we post the episodes along with links to where you can find us on Stitcher and iTunes, the occasional deleted scene or extra essay and so on. And if you've enjoyed the episode and want to help us spread the word to other people, we greatly appreciate a review on iTunes or Stitcher or anywhere else you can review things.
You can also follow the show on Twitter. We're at MFV Podcast. You can also follow us on Tumblr, where we're moderatefantasyviolence.tumblr.com. I've been Alastair Ball. You can find my writing about science fiction at nimbusspace.co.uk and my writing about politics at redtrainblog.blogspot.com.
Okay, and I've been Nick Bryan. You can find my blogging and news of my self-published crime books, the fourth of which is getting increasingly close, at nickbryan.com, and you can follow me on Twitter as @nickmb. So, coming up next fortnight in episode 12, we'll be covering the first quarter of Normal, the new released in segments novel by Warren Ellis, the movie The Neon Demon, the other movie Ghostbusters, you may have heard of it, and also we'll be finding out at long last what I thought of The Big Lebowski. So yep, that's us in 2 weeks for Moderate Fantasy Violence 12. Until then, bye.
Bye.
Of course, the downside of covering this in the recommendations feature is it does effectively tell the world that I have not seen The Big Lebowski, which is one of these things I do feel like I should have seen, but I can confirm I haven't.
Well, you're in for a treat. Well, it is one of my favourite films. All 3 years university, I had a poster of the dude on my wall.
Who knows what the fuck that means?
Oh, you'll definitely know who the dude is before long. You'll be an initiate in dudism.
I mean, on the surface that sounds quite annoying, but I'm sure it's going to end up being amazing.